evening, everybody, and it's a huge pleasure to welcome you to our third online event this evening. I'm actually back in London because I have to be physically back in the House of Commons, and I'm sharing my bedroom flat with a fly. So if I occasionally go like this, please ignore me. She has been very persistent, this fly, but it's I'm happy to share my space with her. Anyway, it is a great pleasure to have you here, everybody. If you have joined us before, you know that the second half of the conversation is your time. And if you want to ask questions, please use the chat function, and then we will make sure that you can ask your question. But the first half is with me and Roger, and I will ask my question in order to get our conversation going. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome you, Roger, to this evening's conversation. The Reverend Roger Driver is the vicar of St. Michael's Without, just opposite Waitrose. Roger, you were born and raised in Dorset, trained in Bristol, and then once ordained, you set off for Liverpool at the end of the 1980s, and then worked in the inner city for 20 years. And then 4 years ago, you were called to serve in our beautiful city of Bath. So a very big welcome. People have seen the news that you opened up your church and hosted a pop-up PPE factory recently in response to the COVID crisis. What made you do that, and how did that go?
It was an interesting request, first one I've ever had, being a vicar of a church. But we're a church that tries to look outwards into the community and make connections. So very early on, it was through someone who we were already in connection with, networked, actually someone who worked within the council structures. They were in contact with the organisation that wanted to make the masks, and they had searched around different places, and it was literally a speculative email that says, it was to our administrator, do you know of anywhere that we could do, because we can't get the social spacing needed for the people for the workers to spread out. And then Lisa, our administrator, just showed me the email, and it didn't actually take a lot of thinking. Said, well, okay, let's be open to the possibility of it, because it's doing some good. Now, this is at a time also when very clearly we have been told all churches had to be shut. So the church was shut. And very early on, I got hold of my bishop and archdeacon and said, look, this is what we've been asked. Are we okay to do it? And then they gave us support and blessing. So we went from there, really. But how it came about, I guess it was through the connections that we already had. And I was quite chuffed, actually, that they felt able to ask what might have felt like a stupid question, that they knew us well enough to say, actually, we wouldn't just say no, we would think about it. We did. Once we realised it could work, well, then the rest is history. They stayed with us for a short while and then moved on to actually King Edward's School, because they needed to expand again. King Edward's Sports Hall is even bigger than St. Michael's, so that's where they went. Yeah, so that's how it came about.
I'd say it's a great testimony, isn't it, to our Bath community cohesion, and really Bath is a bit of a village, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It was when I first came to Bath. It was described in Bath is a city in name and a town in nature. It is, comparing it to many places across the country, I suppose it is town size. And actually, I've been here 4 years, and that's right. I've got to know a lot of people, and similar people pop up a lot, with different things. And yeah, no, it is. How's that village feel? You're right.
Well, and that's not meant to be in a sort of bad way. It's
no,
just,
not at all. No.
Everything that's positive about a village, I think, and yet to have this great, fantastic, beautiful city. I think when we talk about a village, I'd say it's a connection between people. And I always find when people say, oh, you're the MP for Bath, beautiful city. I say, well, the most beautiful thing for me actually is in a way that people connect with each other and have developed a sort of shared feel for the community, and the solidarity that I find is very rare in a place that is ultimately as big as Bath, and Bath is the size of a city. So I always feel very, very privileged.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I do too. When we first came, my wife's from Bristol, and previously, you know, when we used to come down and stay with her parents, used to come across to Bath, and then for quite some time, when we were walking around the city, we would look at each other and say, "And we're not on a day trip," you know. This is home, because it's a privilege to be here. It is, because it is a lovely city.
You left school at 16 and worked in a variety of jobs. And then only when you were 30 were you diagnosed with dyslexia. And that must have been a very difficult time for you.
Well, in terms of when it was apparent that I was dyslexic, that was a tough time, because you go back through. So I went to a secondary modern, have the notoriety of failing in 11 plus, and then going to a secondary modern. That proved to be good for me. Most of my successes through school were on the sports field, and sort of struggling with education. I had to leave school at 16 and didn't have a sixth form, and then didn't leave with many qualifications, and then just bundled into lots of jobs. So I have worked on Weymouth Beach, and I've worked in a takeaway and as a gardener, a van driver. I worked as a picker in a warehouse, done lots of little jobs like that. I was unemployed for a period of time in the early 80s. All that time in school, in terms of, I think I was struggling, but then in terms of not realising why, actually the detrimental negative stuff is actually coming to a conclusion, you know, that if you keep on making the same mistake over and over again, actually you're a bit stupid. And then it did have an impact right into my adult life about low self-esteem, you know, affecting it. And then in terms of, it's a longer story about how it happened, but someone spotted something, and then we ended up with a conversation, and then I actually went for a proper assessment, and that was just an extraordinary moment, really, because then so many pennies and so many things just came into focus and made sense of why I had done the struggle. But also in terms of realizing that without knowing it, I'd done lots of workarounds. I'd done lots to try and get round things and to progress in different things. I had adapted and adjusted, and of which then is really, really helpful. The negative side of it, and then when I meet other dyslexics, particularly those, I think who are diagnosed in adult life, in terms of, because they've had some tough experiences sometimes. I mean, a horrible memory I had. I can talk about it more freely now, but because I found it a struggle, as you know, as a 7-year-old, you know, traumatized through spelling tests, and almost like ritually humiliated every week because I always did so bad. But in the sense that, you know, it takes time. But looking back, you sort of think, okay, there's some parts of me I'm better for it now. When you're living through it, it's not that. It's, you know, it's horrible. But then again, all the jobs and stuff I did, I've seen aspects of life and different people's experience, which holds me to today, actually.
And you, and of course, because of your own lived experience, you can relate so much better to people. But the main problem is always with anything. And to be quite honest, first of all, we know obviously more about dyslexia. I think I definitely have a dyslexic streak in myself as well. Spelling was always a complete disaster for me too. Yeah. But that these sort of things hold you back, and you're measured against a particular criteria that is very exclusive. And to understand how we are holding people back and how it then affects their own self-esteem is obviously the big problem. And how did you get over that persistent being sort of told that you're not good enough? You must have been really strong.
I suppose the honest answer there is not, at times, not particularly, actually, because it, again, is quite damaging. I've already said I found I was reasonably good at sport, and so the self-confidence I actually did build in game was from the sports field. And in terms of, you know, I was captain of a few things and leadership there. So in terms of actually, that's where I built my confidence, really, you know, from that side. And it's also then, I mean, when I ended up at college in Bristol training to be a vicar, and I did spend most of my time on the back row of the lecture theatres, but I developed some really good friendships, and that networking And then actually those relationships, actually they were the ones I discussed and talked through stuff after the lecture to help me make sense of what I just experienced. And then that was different in terms of working together to succeed together, and that's what sort of pulled me through, really. The low self-esteem stuff can manifest itself in quite a damaging way, and again, it helps me in my pastoral work when I see it in other people, because then most of the time, actually, through my teenage at school, I convinced myself I'd failed, so that when I did, I'd already prepared myself, and it can be quite low doing that. And then when you succeed, and one moment when I was at college, I finally did a piece of work that got a really decent mark, and I was so shocked by it. I actually took it to the tutor thinking he'd made a mistake, and he'd marked me too high, and I thought he had marked me low. I should have had lower, but he said no. You got that because you deserved it. So
when you now recognize low self-esteem in people, how do you support them? How do you help them?
Well, it's a way. So you probably are going to ask me a bit about some of the stuff I've done. So when I was in Liverpool, in outer estate Liverpool, sort of working there, and clearly identified within the community. It's a very, very vibrant community. It's very resilient, but often meeting people with low self-esteem and low self-worth, particularly women, and holding households together who haven't succeeded in school. And when we went to work there, we started with my wife taking a lead on some aspects, but we started something as simple as a toddler group. We started with, within 3 weeks, we had grown out of the small room. But then we connected with Liverpool Hope University, and we actually brought in access courses to actually develop training and teaching. And then you could see the women just building confidence, and it was like just believing in people. And when some of them ended up, graduating degrees or using the newfound confidence to get jobs and things like that, it's very pleasing to see that. But the beginning bit, I think, is just as simple as listening to people and believing in them, and showing a level of empathy and understanding. So, and I suppose then coming from experience myself.
Yeah, which brings us to a very interesting topic about how do we regenerate lives and people and communities. I happen to actually also have lived in Liverpool, probably roughly overlapping with your with your time there. So we arrived in Liverpool in 1990, January 1990. And I just couldn't believe the level of deprivation and physical destruction of the city, to the point that I felt the war had just been over. It was just unbelievable, the amount of streets, whole streets that were just derelict. And ever since I have sort of wondered about, give me the key to regeneration. I remember in one of the inner cities, a prominent inner city streets, Henry Street, I'm sure you know which one I mean.
Yes, I do.
There was a very big house. And a tree, a real mature tree was growing out of the gutters there. And I remember saying to William, who was always very positive about Liverpool, he came in the 1990s, said, Liverpool has turned a corner, it's going to go up now, it cannot go any further down. And I said to William, if that tree is no longer growing out of the gutter, I believe that Liverpool has turned a corner. And all the 9 years that we lived in Liverpool, up to 1999, the tree was still there. It was finally removed and the whole area regenerated in the early 2000s. So it takes time, but it's not just physical regeneration, isn't it? It's the key to regeneration is about people and communities, isn't it?
No, it is, and it is, and then as I've already mentioned about a resilience within. And in Liverpool, and what I learned in terms of the making of Liverpool, there's a long history. So particularly when I went to Bootle, it was one of the most heavily bombed times in the war, and then living through the Blitz, and a community that actually came together. And actually you saw that strength in the older members of the community, actually sort of giving leadership to the younger ones, even though it was fragmented. And again, you'll know Liverpool is renowned for its humour. Its humour holds it many a time, puncturing pomposity and, very easily with well-placed humour. And then personally, actually learning not to take yourself too seriously, because you'll be taken down a peg. But actually, it was then it was a Roman Catholic priest, Father Tom, and very early on in one of the parishes, he said to Roger, "If you love the people, they'll love you back, and you know, show respect." And that proved to be good advice that was said to me. And you know, and there's the creativity and the imagination and the ideas. And there's a lot to tackle, because sometimes a lot of structural stuff in the way that organisations, the public sector, or indeed government at that time were working and functioning. I wasn't in Liverpool during the 1980s, but remember once describing, in terms of the difference between, you know, that Liverpool, what was going on, they were taking on the national government almost, trying to bring it down. And then it was the people that suffered in the middle of all that. And so things should have improved and got better quicker, but they didn't. But yet there's a resilience that holds through. Yeah.
Yeah, and a great spirit of resistance and fight. You know, it has to be said. But coming back to Bath now, obviously with all that sort of rough Liverpool inner city experience, coming to Bath and to St. Michael's Without, how do you sort of see the two in some connection of your work and your faith? Yeah,
it's yeah, I just leading into an answer to that is very interesting. So I did a curacy in Woolton, which is I suppose a wealthier suburb in Liverpool. And when we went to Fazakerley, people there said, "Why are you going to there? You know, why? You're in Woolton." And then when we left Fazakerley and went to Bootle, then that community said, "Why are you going to Bootle?" Yeah. And then when I went from Bootle to Bath, it's, "Why are you going there?" Because again, it's so different. So I've had that question, and I've had that question a lot. And then often people wrongly stereotyping Liverpool. My two lads were born in Liverpool, and people hear their accent and they get sometimes a negative reaction because it's laden with stereotypes, wrongly. But coming to Bath, I mean, there are some things which are very, very different. And some of the infrastructure and things, you know, are better here. But actually, when it comes to people are people, that's what I learned. And in terms of the same needs, the same fears, the same anxieties, some of the same issues going on within families, perhaps in Bath way, you know, with different layers in front of it. So sometimes things aren't as visible. In many ways, I suppose Pulteney Bridge is a good metaphor for me, because in the sense there's two sides to Pulteney Bridge. There's the photogenic side, which is the side that Bath presents itself. Actually, if you go around the Waitrose side of Pulteney Bridge, there's an ordinariness, and I think, and also in terms of, you know, you go up to the Crescent and you go around the back of the Crescent, you see the ordinary bricks go to the front, and you see the nice front. Now, I guess people are people, you know, we present ourselves, but actually when you get to know people, they're people. And so the pastoral engagement, the pastoral work, you know, is just the same. So there's contrast, but also similarity, is what I found. Yeah.
But isn't actually the particular problem of Bath that it's always be seen as very posh and wealthy, and, you know, it's where people spend their money, and you know, having fun, and be overlooked easily. Then actually there's also a big part of Bath that is less well off, deprived, often pushed to the margins, to a point that people from Twerton, for example, don't even want to come into the city centre because they don't feel it is their city. And we've very, you know, at the very beginning talked about Bath as a village, but you know, sometimes you know, even in a village you can forget about all the people that live there, and what would you suggest we do in order to bring that cohesion across the whole of the city?
There is, in terms of poverty and deprivation, it is there. It is in Bath. You can see it, but I think you can see it if you want to see it. I think I would challenge people if you want to see it, because if you can miss it if you never get out your car, if you just drive to the city centre, park up. I know the theatres and everything else is shut at the moment, but in terms of, but you know, if you just keep yourself away, then you'll never will see. And if you open your eyes, you'll see things. And And again, there are physical things that we talk about inclusion and cohesiveness. There are either structural things or economic reasons why people can't. So I mean, even the cost of a bus fare, is a significant part of a low-income person's disposable income. Yeah, but then when you get to the centre of Bath, what can you actually afford in terms of different parts of it? And it's thinking through carefully those things. But so, I mean, again, I saw that Liverpool, I see that in Bath. Cities are cities, and it has different elements of it. And I think the challenge of it is that some of that poverty and deprivation is hidden. And if we're really concerned about it and really want to make a difference and a change, I guess it is making ourselves more aware, educating ourselves to actually see there and actually spot the people who are trying to work. If you're not personally able to do much, I suppose, hands-on, it's then being aware of organisations and structures that are doing something, to make a difference.
Which brings us beautifully to the fact that you are a trustee of Baines 3SG and the Compassionate Communities. Can you just sort of tell us a little bit more about them, because they have actually been instrumental in many ways in the recent COVID crisis, and their exposure is quite hidden actually, but they were probably the ones, the glue that has kept the recent response to the crisis together, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So 3SG is Third Sector Group. That's, I guess that's a phrase that goes back to the 1990s, but it's the voluntary community and faith sector. That's effectively what it is. And the voluntary community and faith sector is a large body. Some people will be very experienced it. So, I mean, some really big charities from, I don't know, the Children's Society, which is a really huge one, and then you get things from Citizens Advice Bureau, right through to really tiny small charities and organisations that don't have any employees, or even little community groups that run, a pensioners' lunch club or whatever, a whole variety of things. So that's the sector. It was 2 years ago, again, so I'm 2 years into the city as I'm getting to know people, and then instinctively just looking outwards. And one of the reasons why I came to St Michael's is they advertised, they put out a parish profile, and we actually, clergy apply for jobs in the same way as normal jobs. But what took my eye was a church that said, we want to make stronger connections into the community. We want to look out. The historic name of St Michael's is St Michael's Without. And that's a gift, actually, because St Michael's wants to be a church without walls, and not with barriers, but looking outwards. And that's why I came, because that's what gets me up in the morning, in terms of saying that's that want of reaching out and connecting, and a St Michael's wanting to make a difference in the city centre. So that's what sort of, and then I getting to know people, networking, and then introducing myself and being in gatherings and getting to know the sector. And in the city, there had previously been, but there wasn't 2 years ago, any organisational structure that tried to actually bring the voluntary community sector together. It can be quite tough, because when you get a little charity, they want to spend all their time doing the work they're doing, or they haven't got any workers. And so by having one organisation that could actually represent them, that's where the seeding of the idea. And then a whole group of us came together 2 years ago, and then we decided to set up a charity, 3SG, as an umbrella organisation for all of those. So that's 2 years ago. So then you roll forward now to what's happened into March. So it didn't just happen. So working on relationships with the council, and then it all, February into March, don't need to rehearse all that we've been living through. And it was James Carling, who's our key worker, a fabulous person. And he spotted something when people wanted to volunteer where they could help. And then he realised that we had an infrastructure, we put one in place that could actually help that, reached out to them, and actually then set up a central place where people could actually make offers to volunteer, but also then beginning to make connections. We reached to the council and then Virgin Care. And then what came out of that was this hub, which is based in Radstock. There's a leaflet actually has gone out to every household, 80,000 leaflets you know, across the area, which has got this telephone number. And it's a genuine, absolute partnership, you know, in terms of the public sector, along with the voluntary community sector, making a difference. I mean, there's thousands that have been helped through that little connection. Sorry, Vera, it was just then, I said to the colleagues I've got closest with, of all the stuff I've done, and I've been a trustee of many charities and things like, I think I really enjoy being a trustee of 3SG and get a great sense of, you know, that it's made a difference at a really important time. So, yeah, no, it's a good...
No, I mean, sorry to interrupt you. Obviously, you're very passionate about it, and you can talk about this for such a long time. And I mean, everybody should know really that without 3SG and the COVID crisis and the response to it would have just been so much poorer. So you've already made such a big difference to our city, Roger. And I think we all really owe you a great, a lot of gratitude for that. I always have got some one little quirky detail. One day I had worked late and I came out of my office and untied my bike, and there was a note in the rain with a telephone number saying, "Thank you for ruining my afternoon. You've tied your bike to mine." Oh my God. So I rang this person. It was James Carling. And he thought it was very funny that the stupid woman or the stupid person who had ruined his afternoon was actually the member of parliament. So I was obviously massively apologetic, and he was very good about it. Anyway, that's James, and he, yeah, as you say, he's just a wonderful man, and we're so lucky to have him. Just looking forward, coming out of the COVID crisis, and we've seen this wonderful community spirit in many ways. How do you think we can sort of keep that and take that through coming out of COVID?
It's a good question, because I think then therein lies some really deep challenges, I think, really. So there's a lot of positive things been happening. Again, when you, in streets and neighbourhoods, when you see people getting to know neighbours for the first time and helping out, we saw literally thousands of people offering to volunteer and to help, going outside on Thursdays at 8 o'clock to applaud the NHS, or you know, different things. Within my church, all our youngsters, they put thank you notes on all the bins for all the guys that empty the bins. These are really, really good things. But they think now we're going into almost, we come from rescue stage, now we're going to go into recovery. And the recovery stage, in a moment when the council are facing cuts, they've got to try and, you know, look at budgets. James, we did a survey through 3SG across the voluntary community sector. Charities are down significantly on the income they need to run. Some of them are threatened with existence, literally. And I think then it's going to be about leadership, about trying to hold on to those gains that we've got in the relationship, because I think what's going to be challenged, we've all, I heard someone the other day, we've all experienced the same storm, but in different ways. So a key worker has experienced a storm in a different way than someone who lives in a house with a garden, in a different way than someone living in a flat, one-bedroom flat with no garden, and they've had to stay in. And coming out of that, in a sense that maybe people feeling an injustice, or cross or angry, feeling bereft or anxious, an explosion of different emotions and trauma, lots of things, and then coming out of that in terms of, and I think, for example, trust will be challenged, actually, because when resources are spartan or spare, you know, the danger will be we've gone from a moment of giving, when actually people will revert to stuff that we don't like, to more a thing of taking, because you'll protect and guard to try and do it. And I've seen it in public sector organisations in the past. I mean, again, in Merseyside, the council where I lived, in the last 10 years, they've had 53% of the budget taken away. And so, and you see then behaviours manifest themselves, that actually, when it's, that people then protect and guard. And I really worry then the positive stuff we've seen is then, you know, damaged or affected. And that's why I mean the leadership needed to actually try and hold on to what we've gained. And I think I mean, again, if there's any councillors in on this gathering, you know, they're going to have a big job in terms of trying to have the challenge, find the answers to a challenging budget. We've got this wonderful hub, 3SG, public sector, Virgin Care, and with the CCG. I've seen it in the last 20 years. So when things get tight, the first thing that gets chopped is the voluntary community sector, because it's easy to target. And then what a council will do is protect itself. And you can say, well, I can understand why they're doing that. But actually, hopefully what we've seen, actually, by working together, we actually meet and serve the community in a better way. And it's trying to hold on. I mean, some charities have already had notes from the council saying, you know, you're going to get less money and to trim. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. And again, I suppose, you know,
the council is going to be in a very unenviable position, and
very difficult.
Let's be a little bit political here. I think 83 out of £1.83 go into adult social care. It's a statutory service, and the council's got to spend that money. So the last 17p go on everything else, including the bins, including to keep our street lights on, including to repair the roads, and all the things that a council does, including trading standards, including, you know, so many things that a council does. And I was a councillor, and I always feel for my council colleagues. And all that money, when that gets squeezed and you actually have to deliver a service, adult and children's social care, what are you going to do? You don't have to tell any councillor that actually giving a bit of money and keeping a charitable sector going, because you give a bit of money and then they can thrive and do so many good things, is the right thing to do. Unfortunately, it looks like the council will have fewer and fewer options. And so that's where I come in to lobby central government to say, look, if you don't give enough money to local councils, then suddenly the whole of that cohesion and that glue that we've been talking about, and that generosity of spirit will collapse. So I will make that point. But I think it's time for our audience now to ask their questions. Thank you so much for your time answering all my questions, Roger. And now over to the next session, which Matt will compare.
Just to remind everybody, if you click on the chat button in the bottom there, the chat box will appear on your right, and you can write in your questions there. There aren't any questions at the moment. When we were talking the other day, I asked you the question, because I was saying as a councillor in this difficult situation, but when you go to the Guildhall, there's all these photographs of all the old chairs of the council and all the mayors. Now St Michael's has been around a long time, 1100 and something, isn't it?
Yeah, 1180.
1180. So there's probably not photos of all the vicars, but is there a list of names?
There is. It's a very. You have to stay humble, because then when I go up to, if you go to St Michael's, there's a staircase up to the office. Yeah, there's a long list, and I'm the second Roger to serve at St Michael's. The other one was so well known, he was just called Roger. He didn't have a surname. But yeah, no, it's a long list. And St John's Foundation, St John's Hospital as it was called, is 6 years older than us. And then obviously the oldest one is obviously Bath Abbey itself, as an organisation. Yeah.
So Roger, you're not looking for a statue anytime soon, are you?
No.
The one question that I couldn't ask, but we are waiting for people to hopefully put on their own questions, is obviously also, you know, the very most recent events about Black Lives Matter, and we've got a relatively small Black community in Bath, but you know, ethnic communities in general. How do you think we in Bath should respond to all of those?
I think with care and a lot of humility, because again, if we know, I think it's important to know our history, because and understand how history shaped a place, I suspect when we start looking, you know, we lift the lid. Some things are known. You know, Bath has a relationship with Bristol. You know, Bristol as a port, Bath as a place of leisure and of living, and there's been strong connectiveness. And And so we need a lot of humility, really, and courage to face up to perhaps things that we don't want to see or hear. And then it's, a commitment to actually make difference and change, and challenge us in our behaviours and our language and our attitudes, and the decisions we make. Unconscious, bias. Just being aware of that concept and actually challenging ourselves, about it. Yeah.
I've got a question here from Adrian, who obviously knows you well, Wera. Wera, I'm genuinely concerned that we are coming out of lockdown at the very time this government is embarking on perhaps the most self-destructive act of my lifetime, which is exiting the EU. How do you feel we should cope with the anger, the loss that Bath itself is likely to experience, given its dependence on Europe, not just tourism, etc.?
Edwin, I think this is obviously a discussion for, ultimately a different place. How do we cope with the loss that I feel too, that we have now left the European Union? Can I encourage you to actually come along to an event for Bath for Europe on the 16th of June, where we will be talking about Europe and how we go forward and how we cope with our own feeling of anger and loss and depression about the whole situation. Because I think it might be a slightly better forum to talk about that than using Roger's precious time. But I was in a Bath for Europe meeting on Sunday, and clearly one of the big things that we should concentrate on as a sort of Remain movement is also the human cost of Brexit. And there we are coming back, I think, to what Roger has said in the last half hour. It's about looking out for people and connecting with each other, whether we are Black or whether we are European citizens, and understand that ultimately we all share the same humanity, and unfortunately politics often comes in the way of it, and faith and the church is often trying to bridge that. And Roger, we haven't really talked about faith at all in the last half hour, but before we came on the Zoom, we talked about what was Jesus's response to so many issues that are still so relevant today. The response to poverty, the response to exclusion, but also actually, you said interestingly, he never actually said anything about slavery. So how we as Christians do we actually respond to everything that surrounds us currently?
Mm-hmm. Is that, and no, you're right. We did talk about slavery, and then said, but when as a Christian, and again, my faith is a strong motivator. I became a Christian when I was, around the age of 16. I'd been brought up in and around church, but taking a faith of my own. But actually, if I personalise it in terms of understanding that made in the image of God, men and women, that actually, and humanity, and seeing the humanity in other people, and then you see an inequality. I believe that's what then leads. Then, although Jesus, then you can't find a statement where Jesus condemns slavery. But what we can, in terms of, extrapolating that and saying actually, about our understanding of love for each other, and loving your neighbour, what that means. And then when you see the fullness of humanity in all people, and then you come, I think, to those logical conclusions about, well, actually, then why do we diminish, or why do we have prejudice or discriminate or treat people in slavery in terms of subhuman? In that way, and those things are just clearly wrong. And then, wanting to change structures and to challenge structures to actually make change and a difference. And I suppose, me as a vicar, you then practice what you preach, and sometimes your actions should speak louder than just your words, because if it's just words, it can, I guess, lost. But you follow it up with how you live your life.
Got a question then from Alison. Sorry, I came late. You may have answered this, but I don't think we have. Do you think virtual worship and prayer will become a regular feature in the future? And you were saying the church is about to open up again.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, because I spent the morning with other clergy in Bath Deanery, and we were talking about, because the government said that we can open churches for private prayer from the 15th, and we're working through the ramifications of what we need to do that. It's been an interesting experience in lockdown. My congregation's actually grown in size, and our reach has grown. We deliberately made an attempt to make sure we had the connectors out, and then bit by bit, so we've probably gone up by 25-30%, in connection, and we do a lot of our activity using Zoom, and then we do a daily email, that comes out, and then but listening to other clergy again. There's others in Weston and Coombe Down, all their activity. They're getting big hundreds, on every gathering, and we're connecting with people that we wouldn't have connected with before, and now we're talking. But here's the challenge in terms of no one knows exactly when we'll be able to have services again in the way that we knew them back in March. It might be 6 months, might be less. I don't know. We hope for less. It could be longer. So in the immediate, I think we're all planning, in a sense, to keep online activity along with what we can do physically. But just to demonstrate this, so one of the churches in the deanery, when they worked out 2 meter social distancing, and they've got pews, and then having to have 3 pews gap between each person, they've worked out that they can have 20 people in each service if they had one. Now they've got a congregation of 200. So, and then he says, so are we going to, if we're expected to have a service of 20 people, then they go out, then we deep clean the church, then the next 20 come in, and then we do that 10 times on a Sunday, and then we've got to have the volunteers to come in to clean the church and do all those things. It's just not, it's not feasible for us to do that. So we've got to keep going with the online. In the full long term, I suspect we are going to keep going online, actually, because it will connect with people in an easier way, and then we will have churches we know it in terms of physical gatherings in buildings. So hopefully that answers the question. But we will not all churches, because we have to get there when we've got the churches right and we can do the cleaning, get it right. But you'll see some churches opening next week for the first time.
Got a couple of comments. Well, I've got a long comment from Tim. A comment: we in Marksbury Village are very appreciative of the grant the council allocated us recently to cover loss of income. In return, we are offering the use of the village hall, for which we got the grant, for use by our primary school. So that's good news to help keep the distancing. From Alistair, for both Roger and Wera, what are the positive consequences arising out of COVID-19, e.g. environmental recovery, greater sense of community, and what can we do to ensure that these continue as we move out of lockdown? Sort of what we were talking about at the end there, but are there any concrete?
Is this a question to me or to Roger?
It's both of you.
All right, Roger, off you go.
Well, in a different way. So we've already touched, haven't we, on the human side, and in terms of cohesiveness and community, and those are really positive things. Likewise, I think I see it as a positive anyway. It's causing us at this moment to say it's about discontinuities and continuity. So we're looking at some things and we suddenly realise, actually, let's let them go, because we thought they were important, they're not so important. There's stuff that's been reinforced in terms of the way that we relate to each other, that we want to hold on to. And actually then there's new things, because new possibilities that open up, and that can be challenging. As I say, we reach out into the community, and my connectiveness with the Walcott Street traders and Kingsmead and some of the businesses and business owners, I've kept on meeting them virtually and engaging with them. I think some of those businesses are not going to open again. Others will, and they're going to struggle, and new things will emerge. But then, but again, I even though within that business community, just to see the collaboration and the cooperation, and somehow it's just trying to hold on to that. So you've discovered something really good, and hold on to it. How would you answer that, Wera?
Well, we're obviously in a time of very deep uncertainty, and I'm, it's positive for all those who are Christian and part of a Christian community to see that actually you know, your congregation and other congregations have grown, because people are suddenly, first of all, they have a bit of time to go inside themselves and think and reflect more. And I think that time is a positive thing. You know, our lives are often so hectic and so full of things, and we make them full of things, that we sometimes just don't realize how important it is that we also have an inner balance and ask ourselves questions and ask ourselves the sort of deeper questions, and that people then turn to faith again, of one faith or another. It's I don't think surprising, but it's good that we have had this time for ourselves. I think that's a positive thing, and hopefully people won't forget you know, the peace you get from that when you can reconnect with yourself and with faith, or whatever that is that gives you your deep sense of being. Can we take some of that out into a post-COVID world? I hope we can, because for some people that has been such a powerful experience. I think they will want to continue with that. We obviously also have learned a lot of stuff. I mean, you know, we were restricted, but hey, have we not all learned to do the Zoom call and to connect much more widely across the board? I've now got meetings that allow me to meet people on a Tuesday morning. Usually we used to meet up the road in London. Yeah, that would have meant that people that would have to travel long hours to be there for 10 o'clock in the morning. Of course, much fewer people were coming then than that are coming now, because they can just Zoom in from Liverpool, from Worcester, from South Cambridgeshire, and all come into the same meeting together without any trouble. And the quality of the debate that we are having, this is in the climate cluster, is just not diminished. So I'm sure we are keeping some of these new found working practices into a post-COVID world. But also it has made us realize and value again how important human contact is. So to find a balance between, you know, what is practically actually much better to do online, but also thinking about which ones are the valuable physical contacts that we have. I think that thinking and that working out is a very valuable thing. And then of course, everybody points to the great advantages of, you know, our environment, our reconnection with nature. Those people who are of faith obviously very much look at nature and the environment and creation as something that goes together. So the appreciation of nature and the God created universe is obviously something that has also been found and rediscovered by so many people. And to value that and understand, you know, free from noise, we hear the birds again, free from pollution, we can breathe better air. These sort of things are the positives that I hope very much we will take into the future and make sure political structures will back that.
I've got a couple of questions here that are almost on the same topic. So from Charles, are there tangible things that the church can do to compensate for the damage inevitably caused by the pandemic, specifically in Bath or more generally? But also a question from, what help might be given to vulnerable children over the summer, and possibly for other children and young people who are greatly missing their usual activities? Is there a role for 3SG and churches?
The practical thing. Just talking about St. Michael's. So I love St. Michael's in terms of our activity, because then we sort of pride ourselves, we're almost open normally, almost every day of the year. We host many different events and activities. We're hoping to get our cafe up. But one of the activities that we really facilitate and try and work really hard at it is lots of charities who are fundraising so they can do the work that they do. And obviously all that stopped. And I'm as soon as we can, in whatever way we can, we want to try and get back into supporting those charities and organisations, helping them sort of relate. The joy of that is obviously the cultural side. I suppose another answer to the previous question is sometimes you don't, until you lose something, you don't realise how important it was, and culture and art and being together and singing and celebrating. And a lot of those events are geared around those things. So in a practical way, I hope we can find a way that we can support that activity. And the charity, lots of charities in Bath need that to happen. They will need to fundraise to actually do the work. So that's sort of tangible ways. I think the other part is actually, I mean, within my own congregation, but others, but not actually, doesn't actually matter whether you're in a believer or not, or whatever you believe or don't believe. It's actually then giving continued support to the NHS and workers, and people are doing really important work in the city, and just trying to practically show support, encouragement, pastoral help if that's applicable, in different ways. So that was the first. What was the second question, Matthew? What was?
It was Charles, wasn't it?
Was that to do with 3SG and vulnerable children, wasn't it? And no, I think yes, 3SG. Now 3SG is an organised charity. So in a sense, we deliberately position ourselves as not delivering that activity, but what we want to do is then lots of the organisations that are part of 3SG to give them support to actually do that exact work, reaching out to vulnerable children, of which then again there's a whole load of things. I mean, again, lots of the City Farm, or there's lots of children's activities and youth activities going on, and they'll be raring to go with that activity, but having to think creatively how they can do that, particularly for as long as we've got to do social distancing, how that's done. Again, a lot of churches are doing online stuff. It's funny, us older people, learning technology. For the younger generation, some of this technology, it's like breathing to them. It's just natural, and so they've taken naturally to these things. So we're doing that, and I think, again, things like the food bank, that's important, supporting families, and citizens' advice. When people have got into financial and debt problems, again, it's giving backing to organisations like that to give practical help. So there's lots to be done and lots to support.
I think we shouldn't underestimate the huge danger to young people, particularly the vulnerable ones, who simply couldn't be reached by services, and they're not in school. And it is very clear that domestic abuse has gone up, because it's a challenge for all of us, including me. Even in a nice house with a functioning partner, my marriage is not breaking down, but seeing the same person day in, day out can be a challenge. And if there's already tension, and you are in a small flat, and you have got tensions in a relationship anyway, all of that problems. And then if you're a vulnerable child within that situation, with a potentially abusive parent, these things are there. People know that they're there. The police knows that they're there. Services knows that these things are out there, and they can't really get to these young people. So there is going to be a huge challenge of how to respond to that increased need, and the traumatic experiences that young people who live in abusive households are being exposed to, and currently nothing can be done because basically they have to stay in their home. So online abuse is going up. There are many challenges, and unless we support the sector, unless there's more money into the children's services, we are going to see a lot more suffering. So there is, I see that as one of the biggest problems, actually, young people, and the abuse that's gone on in the last 2.5, 3 months behind doors. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, left myself muted. Oops. That's an expression I've learnt to use a lot these days. I've got a question from Alistair. Well, there's a point from Susan. Susan, I'm not quite sure where you've heard this from, but I'm just going to, I'll type in the office email address, and perhaps you could email us and tell us what that's about. Alistair's asking, sorry to ask a second question, but what do you both make of Donald Trump posing outside a church with a Bible as a political stunt? You don't have to answer that, Roger. And what role can and should faith play in politics? Maybe you want to focus on the second half.
No, the first part of that is then I just happened on the night it happened. I was actually I was finishing off something actually, and then I just turned on the news, and I went to and I was watching it. And then I just kept on watching it. So I saw it happen live. But it was actually 20 minutes after they actually had the bishop, the Episcopalian bishop who covers that parish, And the bishop was mortified, absolutely mortified. She didn't know anything about it. Church workers had been on the steps of that church, actually supporting, giving out water to people in the street, and they were cleared off the church steps. So in a sense, it was horrific that actually happened. So and caused absolute offence, holding up a Bible. And in terms of, I mean, some of the reactions about, not just holding up a Bible, it's actually wanting to read it and to put into practice some of what's in it. It's a confusing thing to have happened. And then, I mean, won't go any further, because again, there's other commentators, and perhaps that will come back to haunt him in terms of what he did, in terms of sort of critique. And then, Matt, the second part was faith in politics.
Faith in politics. I mean, we did have that conversation about should Christians take planning seriously.
I did. Blowing me a trumpet, but I did a master's in regeneration, and that came out of my activity in Liverpool, and I wanted to step back and actually think through it really. And then you think, so what is there a Christian view on a planning application? Yeah, and actually I would come to a view, yes, there is, and I would come at it because I think there's good design and there's bad design. There's good housing and there's bad housing. There's housing and public realm that dehumanizes people. There's good planning, good design that helps communities connect to each other. And so then I would want to speak into that. So if you were looking at planning applications and decision making, you would actually challenge it and say, I mean, some contemporary housing is smaller than what we regard as 2 up, 2 down terraces, and with thin walls. And you say, is that really livable for good mental health and good families to live in? And you say no, and then you say, I object to that. So now, if that's engagement with politics and decision making, well, I think that's fair game, because then that's about standing up for things that are right and challenging, in that way. In terms of party politics, is something different. In terms of then, in a sense, and that has its place, absolutely, in our society. It's legit for people of all persuasions politically to stand up and air their views, legitimate. You won't hear me stand up in a pulpit and proclaim a political party. I don't think that's right. You will hear me challenge structural things, if I believe they're wrong, or believe things need to be thought about in a different way. But that's in a sense said to everyone, not just to one particular one. I could go deep. Again, I suppose it's born out. I was ordained by Bishop David Shepherd, former England cricket captain, and I was influenced very heavily by a thing called Faith in the City report, mid-1980s. That got heavily criticised by the government of the day because it was deemed to be too political. But what it was doing was, in a sense, challenging structures, challenging inequalities, challenging prejudice and discrimination. Now, those things, I guess, politics is about decision making. When you're challenging whether right decisions or structural change, then faith and politics do fit together, in that way. Some may come back at me. They need to, maybe. If you want to give me pushback on that, happy to take that.
Just to add to that, I make no bones over the fact that I'm a Christian, but I try to live my faith rather than just holding up the Bible. And what Roger said about talking and acting, I think that's very right. Although you could, of course, say that was an act that he went out there and held the Bible, but that was just a very shallow act. I'd say if you really take your faith seriously, then you look at the disadvantage and the message of Jesus to help those who need help and who we need to reach out to. And you can do that as a politician, you can do that as a person. I don't really make so much difference, and I don't put things into boxes, that I ended up being in politics, but you can live your Christian life whether you're in politics or not. But if you're a Christian, I think it would be wrong not let your values be guided as a politician by what you believe in. So I believe in everybody, and that is a very Christian message, to have a good life. Every human being on this earth has the right to a good life, and how do we make that happen and possible, that we can do that nationally, in talking about the inequalities nationally, but we can also talk about global inequalities. And here we go and go into all the way down to climate campaigning. If you're a climate campaigner, if you're a Christian, we can take these two things together and say everybody has the right to a good life, free from fear and free from threat. And that's a very Christian message.
Yeah, I had privilege. I went on a sabbatical. I was given a sabbatical a few years ago, and I spent 3 months in South Africa, and I went to work in a township parish on the edge of Cape Town, in the Cape Flats, a place called Mitchell's Plain. And again, sort of working Jerome, he's still a friend, very, very good friend to this day. But then in that context of apartheid, my role models are people like Desmond Tutu, again, challenging structures and showing in his actions, his words, but showing in his actions. So, and I think actually, particularly, younger people, they look up to people like that and respect them because they've got integrity. That's integrity. Maybe that's the challenge of holding up a Bible, in Washington. Then people make their judgment whether there's integrity, behind someone doing it, or whether it's just a show thing.
Our hour's up. I've got one more question from Carly. Roger, what are the ways people in Bath can get involved to help support our community, our children, our charities, and our churches working within our communities?
Actually, we haven't got long. One thing we learnt going into lockdown was suddenly lots of charities lost their volunteers because a lot of them are from churches and a lot of them in their 70s. Now, really practically, we need to really do a good call out to the people of Bath. If you're not in one of those vulnerable groups, there's organisations and structures that are going to need volunteers to help, restart projects and work. So in a real practical way, we can all work together on this actually, in terms of supporting that, and where it's possible in someone's lifestyle and their work, whether it be on weekends or evenings, where they can volunteer, that would be a really good thing to do. So in the short time we got, that's a really practical thing, that we can all encourage, and then encourage people to step up to make a difference.
Okay, well, I'll hand back to Wera now then. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing a wonderful hour with us, Roger. That was really wonderful and very insightful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you got something out of this as well. We are continuing with our online events. In 2 weeks' time, we are going to have 3 representatives from our Black minority groups. And we will very much want to have an open and honest discussion about discrimination, living in a minority in Bath, and really take up the issue of the day, and that is that Black Lives Matter. So please join us for that event. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Roger. Thanks, Matt, for comparing, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.